Ethan Carter had built his life around survival, not luxury, and every day was a balancing act between exhaustion and devotion. As a struggling single dad, he worked himself to the bone, mopping floors at night, patching roofs during the day, and squeezing in mechanic jobs whenever someone in the neighborhood needed help. His hands were rough, his clothes worn, but his heart was strong because of his daughter, Lily, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who believed her father could fix anything. Their tiny apartment rattled with the sound of leaking pipes and creaking floorboards, but to Lily it was home, especially when Ethan read her bedtime stories in his soothing voice. He had long ago abandoned any illusions of grandeur, his dreams had been replaced by the daily grind of keeping food on the table. That's why when he opened his dented mailbox one late afternoon and found a thick ivory envelope sealed with gold wax, he nearly laughed aloud. It looked like something out of a movie, not something meant for a man like him. The words, Winslow Foundation Annual Charity Gala, gleamed across the front, and inside, his own name was printed neatly, Mr. Ethan Carter and guest. Ethan blinked, sure it had to be a mistake. The Winslows were billionaires, owners of industries so vast they seemed untouchable. He had read about their glittering galas in magazines left behind at the diner where he sometimes worked, nights of champagne, tuxedos, and silent auctions where people spent more on a bottle of wine than he made in a month. Why would they invite a man like him? He nearly tossed the invitation into the trash, but curiosity tugged at him. What if it was real? What if attending could open a door he desperately needed, maybe steady work, maybe a connection who could help him give Lily the life she deserved? His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who adored Lily, urged him to go. Sometimes life throws you a miracle in disguise, she said, patting his arm. So, reluctantly, Ethan agreed. On the night of the gala, he borrowed a suit from his neighbor across the hall, a man twice his size, and did his best to make it fit. He buffed his scuffed shoes until they at least looked presentable and took the bus across town, heart thundering the entire way. When he arrived at the hotel ballroom, the sight nearly stole his breath. Crystal chandeliers glittered like captured stars, the air buzzed with perfume and laughter, and guests floated by in gowns that shimmered with sequins and suits tailored to perfection. Ethan felt every pair of eyes sliding past him, dismissing him, as if they could smell he didn't belong. He kept his head down, determined just to make it through the night quietly. But as he moved further inside, the unexpected happened. A small girl in a pale blue dress broke away from the crowd, her curls bouncing as she ran straight toward him. She flung her arms around his leg and looked up at him with wide, shining eyes. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice clear and certain enough to silence the room. Every head turned. Every whisper stilled. Ethan froze, stunned, as the world seemed to stop around him. Ethan stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears as the little girl clung to him, her tiny voice echoing in the glittering silence of the gala, calling him "Daddy," as if there were no doubt in her heart, and before he could even form words, a woman's sharp footsteps cut through the stunned hush and there she was, Charlotte Winslow, radiant in an emerald gown, her poise cracking as her eyes locked onto his, her face draining of color as though she had seen a ghost, and in that moment Ethan's world tilted because he knew that face, knew it from another lifetime when he was younger, freer, working a summer construction job at a seaside resort and met a girl who was kind and brilliant and unafraid to laugh with the poor worker who fixed her family's broken beach deck, a girl who stole his heart in stolen weeks of sunsets and promises they never got to keep, because she vanished one morning without explanation, leaving him hollow and wondering what he had done wrong. Now she was standing before him, holding the little girl who had called him "Daddy," a child with eyes that mirrored his own. Charlotte's hands trembled as she pulled the girl, Grace, close to her chest, murmuring an apology to Ethan, her voice thick with something more than embarrassment, something like fear, and when Ethan finally found his voice it was rough, strained. "Charlotte, is she?" The question dangled, impossible yet undeniable, and Charlotte's eyes glistened as she whispered back, "Her name is Grace, she's mine, and yes, Ethan, she's yours too." The air left his lungs in a rush, his knees threatening to give out as reality crashed over him. 10 years of absence, 10 years of never knowing he had another child, 10 years where she had grown, spoken her first words, taken her first steps, and he had not been there. Memories of nights rocking Lily to sleep, of going hungry so she could eat, of patching her shoes with tape when money ran dry, all collided with this unbearable truth: another daughter had lived those same years without his love. Anger flared beneath his shock, hot and raw. Why hadn't Charlotte told him? Why had she taken this from him? But then he saw Grace peeking shyly from behind her mother's shoulder, her little hand stretching toward him with the innocent certainty of a child who recognized something deeper than words, and all his fury tangled with a piercing ache of love he hadn't known he carried. Charlotte's explanation tumbled out in rushed whispers as curious guests murmured around them, some pretending not to eavesdrop, others shamelessly gawking. Her family had discovered their relationship and torn them apart, insisting Ethan would never be suitable, forbidding her from seeing him again, and when she discovered she was pregnant, fear and pressure had silenced her, convincing her he had moved on. She raised Grace alone, but the girl had always asked about her father, always insisted she would recognize him one day, and tonight, she had. Ethan's chest tightened painfully as Grace reached again, whispering, "Daddy," with such conviction that his heart cracked open, and in that instant he knew nothing would ever be the same again. That night, long after the glitter of the gala had faded and the whispers of the wealthy still buzzed in his ears, Ethan sat at the edge of Lily's bed, watching her breathe softly in sleep, her small fingers curled around her stuffed bunny, and though her face calmed him as it always did, his mind was anything but still because every time he closed his eyes he saw Grace, her curious eyes, her small hand reaching for him, her voice calling him, "Daddy," with such certainty that it rattled his soul. He had spent years defining himself through struggle, through sacrifice, pouring every ounce of himself into raising Lily alone, and now he faced the unthinkable truth: another daughter existed, one who had lived without him, one who carried his blood yet never his presence, and the guilt of that gnawed at him relentlessly. Over the following days, Charlotte reached out again and again, her calls and texts lighting up the cracked screen of his old phone, and at first Ethan ignored them, not out of cruelty but out of fear that he wasn't enough, fear that stepping into Grace's life would unravel the fragile balance he had built for Lily, fear that he would fail both children if he tried to be father to them both. But Charlotte was persistent, and eventually she came to him directly, showing up at the shabby diner where he pulled shifts for minimum wage, her elegant figure out of place among the sticky tables and buzzing neon light, yet her voice gentle and unwavering as she slid into his booth and whispered, "Ethan, I'm not asking you to provide for her, she doesn't need money, she has everything, what she needs is you." Those words pierced deeper than he wanted to admit, because he thought of Lily and knew that no amount of toys or clothes or schoolbooks could replace the quiet power of a parent's love, the warmth of being held when the world felt scary, the comfort of knowing you were not alone. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan agreed to see Grace, their first meeting arranged at a sunny park where children's laughter filled the air and Charlotte watched nervously as Grace clung shyly to her side, stealing glances at him until he gently asked if she wanted to swing, and when he lifted her onto the seat and pushed, her laughter rang out like bells, a sound that cracked open the wall he had built around his heart. With each visit, the distance between them shrank. At bedtime stories she leaned against his shoulder, at dinners she asked him questions about his favorite colors, his childhood, even whether he liked ice cream as much as she did, and one night when he kissed her forehead, she whispered, "I knew you were my daddy." But while his bond with Grace deepened, Lily's questions grew harder. She tugged at his sleeve one evening and asked why he spent so much time with another little girl, and fear knifed through him until he knelt and pulled her close, promising, "Lily, you are my everything, and nothing will ever change that, but you have a sister now, and she needs me too, just like I need you," and though her eyes widened with surprise, a small smile crept across her lips as she asked innocently, "Does she like dolls?" And in that fragile moment, Ethan's hope flickered that somehow, despite his fear, love might be enough to bind these two worlds together. The day came when Ethan could no longer avoid the inevitable confrontation with the Winslow family, for Charlotte's father, stern, commanding, and unwilling to see past the polished world he had built, summoned them to the estate, and though Ethan's stomach churned with nerves as he walked into the cavernous hall with Charlotte by his side and Grace trailing nervously behind, he knew he had to face this. Not only for himself but for the little girl who had called him daddy without hesitation. The elder Winslow wasted no time, his voice sharp as steel as he declared Ethan unfit, a man of no means, no pedigree, no wealth to offer, insisting Grace deserved stability and privilege, not a father who scrubbed floors and worked odd jobs to make rent. But Ethan straightened his back, his calloused hands clenched at his sides, and when he spoke his words carried the weight of every sleepless night and every sacrifice he had made. "You're right. I don't have riches or influence, but I know what it means to put a child first, to go hungry so she can eat, to work until my body breaks just to keep a roof over her head, and if you think money alone can replace a father's love, then you've never truly known what family means." The room hung silent after his words, even Charlotte's father momentarily stunned by the raw conviction in his voice, and then Charlotte herself stepped forward, her emerald eyes blazing as she slipped her hand into Ethan's, her voice trembling but firm as she said, "Father, Grace doesn't need more diamonds or ponies, she needs Ethan, she needs her father, and I need him too." The elder Winslow scoffed, muttering about mistakes and misplaced loyalty, but his daughter's resolve was iron, and for the first time Ethan saw the girl he had once known, the one unafraid to defy the world for what she believed in. Grace, emboldened by her mother, ran into Ethan's arms, wrapping herself around him with the kind of trust no argument could undo, and in that moment, Lily, who had been shyly hiding behind Charlotte's dress, stepped forward too, her small hand slipping into Grace's, the two girls exchanging tentative smiles before erupting into soft giggles that melted the tension in the room. Ethan held both daughters close, feeling the impossible completeness of a family he never thought he'd have, and as he met Charlotte's tear-filled gaze he understood that despite the years of struggle and pain, despite the mistakes and the distance, they had found their way back to each other. When they left the estate together that evening, the sun setting behind them, Charlotte squeezed his hand and whispered, "You were always enough, Ethan, but now you don't have to do it alone," and for the first time in so many years, his heart felt light, no longer the weary heart of a struggling single dad but the steady, full heart of a man with two daughters, a woman who believed in him, and a family finally rebuilt from pieces once thought forever lost.